The strangest part was not when Veratis Holcomb noticed her husband's footprints had no left heel impression. The strangest part was that she had been noticing it for 3 days and kept deciding it meant nothing. She would replay this later, lying awake in the Irwin, Tennessee Holiday Inn with the bathroom light on and the deadbolt thrown and the chain latched, trying to understand at what point a person's mind chooses comfort over accuracy. At what point does a wife look at the man she has shared a bed with for 11 years, the man who knows she takes her coffee with oat milk and no sugar, the man who still gets nervous before phone calls with his mother, and think, something is wrong with his left heel, and then think nothing more of it? They had started the trail on March 9th, 2024, at Springer Mountain in Fannin County, Georgia. This was not a spontaneous decision. Veratis had been planning the thru hike for 4 years, ever since she quit her position as a clinical audiologist at Emory Healthcare and realized she had spent the better part of her adult life in rooms without windows. Her husband, Petro Holcomb, had agreed with the enthusiasm she had come to love about him, the quality of treating her ideas as if they were obviously correct, as if wanting to walk 2,194 miles through the Appalachian Mountains was something any sensible person would do. They had trained for 18 months. They had gone through 3 different boot models before settling on Salomon X Ultra 4s, size 11 for him, size 8.5 for her. She knew his feet. She had watched him develop and drain a blister on his right little toe on a training hike along the Benton MacKay Trail in October and felt nothing but tenderness at the pale pucker of skin. She knew his feet. The trail in early March is quiet in a way that feels less like peace and more like the landscape is conserving something. The thru-hiker bubble had not yet formed. They passed fewer than 20 people in the first 4 days. The trees at lower elevations were still skeletal, and the light came through them in a way that eliminated shadow. Everything had the flat, detailed quality of a photograph that has not been given time to develop texture. Verada found she could hear things at greater distances than usual. A woodpecker working a dead oak a quarter-mile up the ridge. The creek below them, Stover Creek, which they crossed twice on the second day, still running cold and fast with snowmelt, producing a sound at the edge of her perception that she kept almost identifying before it shifted. Petro was in good spirits. This was the first thing she would circle back to, testing it from different angles. His spirits. He was funny, attentive, navigated without argument when she wanted to stop for photographs. He identified a red-tailed hawk incorrectly as a Cooper's hawk, and she corrected him, and he laughed at himself with what she can only describe as the right amount of self-deprecation. He ate his food. He complained about his pack weight in the mild, performative way he always complained, not genuinely, just acknowledging the weight as a shared fact between them. At the Gooch Mountain Shelter on the second night, they sat with 2 other hikers, a woman named Bex Rurard from Portland who was doing a section hike, and a tall, quiet man named Colhoun something who was also through hiking and who left early the next morning without saying goodbye. She remembers Petro handing her the last of his hot chocolate because she had finished hers. She remembers the warmth of it. She remembers thinking she was happy. The footprint. She saw it on the morning of March 12th, the 4th day, outside the Hawk Mountain Shelter. The night had brought a light frost, not snow, but a crystalline stiffening of the mud near the shelter's water source, and the prints from the morning's brief foot traffic were preserved with unusual clarity. She was filling both their water bottles at the small spring and turned back toward the shelter and saw the line of prints Petro had made walking toward the tree line to urinate. She saw them because the frost had preserved them and because the early light was coming at an angle that made the depression stark. She saw them clearly. The left heel was not there. Each print was complete at the toes, the ball, the arch, the right heel. The left heel simply did not press into the ground. The prints were not shallow. His right heel left a clear, deep impression. The left foot simply bore no weight at the rear. She stood with both water bottles and looked at the prints, and then looked at Petro emerging from the trees, zipping his jacket against the cold. And he said something about the view from the ridge being queerer than yesterday, and she said yes, probably. And they went inside and made oatmeal, and she did not mention the prints. She told herself it was the way he was walking, something with his gait. He had mentioned his knee on a previous hike years ago, a slight tracking issue with his left kneecap. She held this explanation up like a lamp in a dark room and felt its light was sufficient and moved on. She moved on. This is the part she returns to. On the fifth day, somewhere between Justice Creek and Gooch Gap, he began whistling. This was not unusual. Petro whistled when he was comfortable, usually something tuneless and private. But this was a tune, and she recognized it, except she could not place it, and the recognition sat in her chest with a weight she couldn't account for. She asked him what he was whistling, and he said he didn't know, just something that had gotten into his head. She asked him to whistle it again, and he did, and she listened, and the recognition moved through her again, not of a song, but of something else, and she let it go. Let it go. On the sixth day, March 14th, they crossed into North Carolina. The trail around Bly Gap runs through a beech forest, and the beeches are different from other hardwoods in winter. They hold their dead leaves through the cold months, a quality called marcescence, and the sound the wind makes through those dry, copper-brown leaves is closer to something cellular than to any sound leaves should make, rattling at a frequency that suggested the forest was receiving rather than producing. Virati stopped on the trail and listened. Petro did not stop. He continued up the switchback at the same pace, and when she called his name, he turned at exactly the right moment, just a beat before she expected him to, and smiled. She had spent 9 years working in audiology. She understood cochlear mechanics, the physics of sound localization, the variables that affect a person's ability to identify a sound's origin and timing. She knew what a person turning at the right moment looked like versus what a person turning too quickly looked like. Petro turned too quickly. He turned as if he had been waiting to turn. She stood in the beech forest and the leaves made their cellular sound, and she looked at her husband, waiting for her, 20 yards up the trail, and she felt something she did not have a word for. A sensation not of fear, but of a recalibration, as if the light in the room had shifted by a frequency invisible to the eye, but not to the skin. She walked up to him and he put his arm around her and squeezed and asked if she was okay, and she said yes, cold, let's keep moving. That night, Muskrat Creek shelter, they were alone. She watched him sleep. She had done this before, in the early years of their marriage, watching him sleep with the fond, slightly predatory tenderness of a person who cannot believe their luck. She watched him now with different attention, cataloging. His chest rose and fell. His breathing was regular. His hands were loosely open, which was how he always slept, palms slightly up, the position of a person anticipating receiving something. His face was his face. She could find no evidence of anything. And yet, when she finally slept and woke in the early morning to the sound of the shelter's mice and looked at his sleeping form, she had the distinct and ungovernable sensation that something had been listening to her sleep. She told herself this was anxiety. She told herself that hiking alone in the mountains with one other person for 6 days did things to the perceptual calibration. She told herself she was tired and that she had some mild, low-grade infection from the shared water filter. She told herself all of this. She was good at telling herself things. 9 years of audiology had given her a clinical's relationship with explanation, the reflex of reaching for the systemic cause, the metabolic origin, the cochlear physics. She reached now and found her hands full of reasons and continued walking north. The whistling came again on the 8th day. She had her trekking poles out on the descent toward Wallace Gap, focusing on her footing over the wet roots, when she realized Petro was whistling behind her. She stopped and listened. The same tune. And this time she placed it, not as a song, but as something she had heard through sleep, something she had been hearing at the edge of awareness at night and filing as ambient noise. The slight, rhythmic sound she had been half waking to and not quite bringing to consciousness in the shelters. The whistling from behind her on the trail. The whistling from outside the sleeping bags in the dark. The same tune that she had heard without hearing for 8 nights. She stopped walking. She stood on the wet roots at Wallace Gap and did not turn around. She heard the whistling stop. She heard Petro's footsteps halt on the trail behind her. She heard nothing. The forest had gone quiet in the particular way that a forest sometimes goes quiet in the mountains. Not a peaceful quiet, but a suspended one. The quiet of something that has stopped moving precisely because movement has been noticed. Not the cessation of noise. The cessation of noise that was masking other noise. She said, without turning, "Tell me something only you would know." There was a pause. The length of the pause was exactly right. Not too fast, not too slow. The length of a pause from a man who is thinking, who was reaching, who was mildly surprised by the question and working through it. He said the thing about the miscarriage. He said it by name, the name they had chosen for the pregnancy they lost in 2019 before they told anyone. The name they had spoken only to each other. The name she had never written down anywhere because writing it down felt like the wrong kind of permanence. He said it the way Petro always said it, quietly, like handling something that was still warm. She turned around. His face was completely correct. She looked at it and found nothing wrong and felt the floor of the world give slightly beneath her and said, "We're getting off the trail." At Winding Stair Gap, "We're going to the road and we're calling for a ride." He said, "Okay." He said it with Petro's voice, Petro's register, the slight rasp that had developed sometime in his 40s and that she associated with his first cup of coffee. He said, "Okay." He asked if she was feeling all right. She said yes, and turned back toward the gap and did not look at the trail behind her for 11 minutes, which is how long it took them to reach the road. In the car to the Holiday Inn in Irwin, the driver talked about the weather coming in from the northwest, and she watched the mountains recede through the rear window and did not listen. The thing beside her in the back seat answered the driver's questions in Petro's voice. It said his name when asked. It gave his hometown. When the driver said something mildly funny about trail hikers always looking like they had seen a ghost, the thing beside her laughed with Petro's laugh, which was slightly too loud for the space and always had been. She stared at the mountains until they were gone. In the hotel room, in the bathroom with the light on and the chain latched and her phone in her hand, she went through their photographs. 8 days of photographs. Every one of them was exactly as she remembered taking it. The composition she had chosen, the timestamps correct to the minute, Petro and dozens of them with his orange pack cover and his hat with the broken snap, and his face that she knew as well as she knew anything in the world. She's been going through the photographs for 3 hours now. She has been looking for the thing she is not sure she is looking for, the thing she cannot name and is not certain exists and is not certain does not exist. The real Petro called her at 11:47 p.m. She knows it was him because he told her about Mira, the name, their name, the name she had never written down. And she asked him 3 more things and he answered all 3 correctly and began crying in the way she associated with only twice before in their marriage, and she is certain, she is almost certain, it was him. He had been at home for 6 days. He had twisted his ankle on the 3rd day out before Hawk Mountain and taken a shuttle to a clinic in Dahlonega and decided not to tell her until she was off the trail because he knew she would come back and he had wanted her to have this. He had been home for 6 days, wondering why she wasn't answering texts, telling himself she was in a dead zone, telling himself she was fine. She has not told him what walked the trail with her. She is not sure she will. She does not know what name to give it. She has no framework for a thing that knew about Mira, that ate her husband's food, that bore no weight on its left heel, that whistled the same tune outside her sleeping bag in the dark, that answered the driver's questions in the back of a car, that laughed with his laugh, that never once in 8 days did anything she could point to and say, "There, that is where it failed." She is still looking at the photographs. If you've read this far, you already know the feeling. Like the comment with the word Mira if something about this didn't sit right. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one.